Dr. Eleanor Hayes wiped sweat from her brow as dust settled around the bombed-out hospital wing. 3 years working with doctors beyond borders in conflict zones hadn't prepared her for the scale of devastation that had hit Norovir City overnight. The rebel offensive had caught everyone by surprise, transforming the eastern district into a wasteland of concrete and rebar. "Marcus! Get the portable generator running for the East Triage," she called to her assistant. "We've got at least a dozen critical patients who can't wait for evac." The muffled thunder of distant artillery punctuated her words as she moved through the makeshift field hospital. What remained of the regional hospital had been converted into a labyrinth of emergency care stations, each one overflowing with the wounded and dying. A crackled voice came through her radio. "Delta team reporting possible survivors in the Helion Tower collapse. No medical personnel on site." Eleanor grabbed her field kit. "Marcus, I'm taking Team 2 to Helion. Keep things stable here." "Alone?" "The area's still hot, Marcus protested, his face lined with concern. "Those people don't have time for us to wait for the all-clear," she replied, already signaling to the 2 medics assigned to her team. The journey to the collapsed tower took 20 agonizing minutes through streets littered with debris and abandoned vehicles. Twice they had to take cover as drones buzzed overhead, their allegiance uncertain in the chaotic conflict. The Helion Tower, once a gleaming 30-story residential building, now resembled a grotesque sculpture of twisted metal and pulverized concrete. Local volunteers had already begun digging when Eleanor's team arrived. A young man with a dust-covered face approached her. "We've cleared a path to the lobby level. There are voices coming from the eastern stairwell." Eleanor nodded, securing her helmet before following their makeshift path into the ruins. The air grew thick with dust and the metallic scent of blood as they descended into the building's wounded heart. Emergency lights cast eerie shadows across walls that groaned under the strain of supporting floors never designed to rest upon them. "Hello? Medical team here." Eleanor called out, her voice echoing through the ruined structure. A faint noise, not quite a voice, more like a melodic hum, drew her attention to a partially collapsed corridor. Instructing her team to stabilize the more accessible survivors, Eleanor squeezed through a narrow opening in the debris. That's when she found her. A woman lay partially buried under a fallen support beam, unconscious but seemingly unharmed beyond a gash on her forehead. She wore simple clothes, but Eleanor immediately noticed the intricate patterns marking her skin, not tattoos exactly, but fine, silvery lines that seemed to shimmer under the emergency lights. "I need assistance here," Eleanor called, already checking the woman's vitals. Strong pulse. Regular breathing. No obvious trauma beyond the head wound. It didn't make sense. As Eleanor worked to free her from the debris, the woman's eyes fluttered open, striking violet eyes that seemed to pierce through Eleanor with unexpected clarity. The woman spoke, her words flowing in a language Eleanor had never heard, melodic and complex, with sounds that seemed almost beyond human vocal capability. "I'm Dr. Hayes," Eleanor said slowly, showing her medical insignia. "You're safe now." The woman reached up, touching Eleanor's face with surprising gentleness. She spoke again, a different pattern of sounds, watching Eleanor's reaction carefully. "We need to move her," said Raj, one of Eleanor's medics, finally squeezing through the opening. He stopped short when he saw the woman. "Whoa! What's with the glowy skin?" Eleanor hadn't even noticed in the dim light, but the silvery markings on the woman's skin did seem to emit a faint luminescence. "Doesn't matter," Eleanor decided. "Help me get her stabilized for transport." As they worked, Eleanor felt the woman's gaze fixed on her. When their eyes met again, Eleanor had the distinct and unsettling feeling that she hadn't found this woman by accident, but rather, this woman had somehow called her here. The artillery shells fell closer as they carried her out, but Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just irrevocably changed, her fate now intertwined with this mysterious stranger from the rubble. Part 2, Hidden Truth. 3 weeks had passed since Eleanor had pulled Lyra from the ruins of Helion Tower. The woman now sat cross-legged on the cot in Eleanor's small quarters at the field hospital compound, meticulously copying English words from a children's book onto a notepad. Apple, Lyra pronounced carefully, her accent giving the word a musical quality. Her progress with language was nothing short of miraculous. She'd already developed a functional vocabulary and basic sentence structure that most language students would need months to achieve. Eleanor watched her with a mixture of fascination and wariness. The silvery markings on Lyra's skin had faded to barely visible lines, only becoming prominent when she was agitated or concentrated deeply, as she was now. "You're learning quickly," Eleanor commented, sorting through medical supplies for the next day's rounds. Lyra smiled. "My people, we remember words after one hearing. It is natural." She tapped her temple. Different minds. Eleanor had given up trying to determine Lyra's country of origin. Her features suggested a mixed heritage that defied easy categorization: almond-shaped eyes, warm bronze skin, and that cascade of silver-streaked black hair. DNA testing was unavailable in the war zone, and Eleanor had hesitated to report her unusual patient to international authorities, especially after witnessing how Lyra reacted with fear to uniformed personnel. "I found something today," Eleanor said, pulling an old book from her bag. She'd traded 3 precious chocolate bars to a local historian for it. "These symbols, they look like your markings." The book contained archaeological studies of ancient sites around the region. Eleanor opened to a dog-eared page showing cave paintings estimated to be over 8,000 years old. Intricate patterns identical to those on Lyra's skin adorned the walls of a ceremonial chamber. Lyra's fingers trembled as she traced the photographs. "The ancestral scripts," she whispered. "The law before words." Her markings suddenly brightened, causing Eleanor to glance nervously at the door. "Lyra, you need to control that glowing thing you do," Eleanor warned. "These are not from your world's past," Lyra said, her English suddenly more fluid, as if emotional connection had improved her language processing. "These are instructions left by my ancestors when they sealed the pathways between realms." Eleanor sat heavily on her chair. "What exactly are you saying?" "My people, the Avaray, we exist alongside your world but separate. The pathways were closed during the great wars of your ancient times, when humans sought to use our technology as weapons." Lyra's eyes glistened. "I am Lyra Niverin, keeper of the 7th seal and heir to the Northern Throne. I was conducting a ritual observation of your realm when the explosion damaged the transition gate." Eleanor should have dismissed it as the fantasy of a traumatized mind, yet something in Lyra's unwavering gaze made the impossible suddenly plausible. "These markings," Lyra continued, touching her forearm, "are not decorative. They are my lineage, my purpose, my connection to the energy that separates and binds our worlds." Before Eleanor could respond, Marcus knocked urgently at the door. We've got company. Government officials with some private military types. They're asking about unusual survivors from Helion Tower." Eleanor met Lyra's eyes, seeing fear and resignation there. "How would they know about you?" "The energy signature from the broken gate," Lyra whispered. "And these?" She rolled up her sleeve, revealing markings that now pulsed with light. "When activated, they can be detected by certain technologies." Eleanor made a split-second decision that would forever alter the trajectory of her life. "Gather only what you absolutely need. There's a supply tunnel that leads to the old section of the city. Marcus, can you create a distraction?" Marcus nodded grimly. "Give me 5 minutes, then head for the tunnel." "But what exactly are we dealing with here?" Eleanor looked at Lyra, who stood with sudden regal bearing despite her borrowed clothes and uncertain situation. "Something much bigger than this war," Eleanor answered, realizing the truth of her words only as she spoke them. "Something that could change everything we think we know about our world." As they slipped into the shadows of the supply tunnel, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that she was leaving behind not just her medical post, but the comfortable certainty of the world as she had always understood it. The abandoned mining town of Korza offered little comfort beyond its obscurity. Eleanor and Lyra had been moving for 6 days, using Eleanor's humanitarian worker credentials to bluff their way through checkpoints while avoiding official registration points. "They're scanning for your energy signature," Eleanor whispered as they huddled in the shell of an old administrative building. Through the cracked windows, they could see 2 black SUVs slowly patrolling the town's single street. "How are they tracking you?" Lyra's hands worked methodically, arranging small stones in complex patterns on the dusty floor. "The Baryon Group has possessed fragments of Avaray technology since your Second World War. Enough to detect but not understand. Their foundation began as a research division studying artifacts from my world." It had taken Eleanor days to accept even portions of Lyra's explanation, yet each strange encounter made conventional explanations seem increasingly inadequate. The mercenaries hunting them carried devices unlike any military equipment Eleanor had seen during her years in conflict zones. "You still haven't told me why you were in our world to begin with," Eleanor said, distributing the meager rations she'd purchased from a farmer that morning. Lyra completed her stone arrangement, which now emitted a faint hum at the edge of audibility. Was leading the isolation faction among my people. For millennia, we have remained separate from humans, but a movement has grown to share our knowledge with your world." Her voice hardened. "They believe your people have evolved beyond the violent impulses that once made you dangerous. I came to observe, to gather evidence that reintegration would be catastrophic." "And what have you concluded?" Eleanor asked, somewhat defensively. "That the question is more complex than I believed," Lyra answered, her expression softening as she looked at Eleanor. "There is both remarkable compassion and terrible cruelty in your kind, sometimes within the same person." A shout from outside interrupted them. The mercenaries had begun a systematic search of buildings. "They're getting closer," Eleanor whispered. "We need to move." Lyra shook her head. "The stone circle needs 10 more minutes to mask my energy signature." Footsteps approached their building. Eleanor grabbed her medical bag, ready to attempt another bluff about treating local civilians, when the door splintered inward. 3 armed men entered, weapons raised. "Dr. Hayes," the lead mercenary said with cold professionalism. "Step away from the subject. The Baryon Group appreciates your service in locating her, but your involvement ends here." "I don't know what you're talking about," Eleanor started, but the man cut her off. "The bounty for information leading to this subject was quite specific. Someone at your medical compound made the connection and contacted our hotline." Betrayed. Eleanor felt sick at the realization. "The subject will not be harmed," the mercenary continued. "Dr. Kellen has dedicated his life to studying her kind. He simply wishes to understand the technology. Technology that could help your weapon development," Lyra stated flatly, rising to her feet. Her markings now blazed with light, casting harsh shadows across the room. "Please don't make this difficult," the mercenary said, raising his weapon. What happened next occurred so quickly that Eleanor would later struggle to describe it coherently. Lyra raised her hands, and the stone pattern erupted with blinding energy. The mercenaries were thrown backward as if hit by an invisible wave. Their weapons disintegrated into dust. Lyra grabbed Eleanor's hand. "Now we run." They fled through the back of the building as more mercenaries converged on their position. Eleanor's medical training hadn't prepared her for sprinting across rough terrain with armed pursuers, but survival instinct propelled her forward. "The gateway to my world lies 3 days' journey from here," Lyra said as they crested a hill overlooking a dense forest. "But I cannot return without ensuring these people won't follow, or worse, find another transition point." Eleanor looked back at the chaos they'd left behind, mercenaries still reeling from whatever force Lyra had unleashed. "What exactly are you?" Eleanor asked, breathless. Lyra's expression was both ancient and vulnerable. I am what your ancestors once worshipped as divine and later hunted as witches. I am the culmination of a civilization that chose to evolve differently than yours. She squeezed Eleanor's hand. And I am someone who now questions everything she once believed about your kind. As they disappeared into the forest's shadows, Eleanor realized she had crossed a threshold from which there could be no return to her former life. Whatever awaited them, she was now irrevocably part of Lyra's world. The mountains loomed before them, jagged teeth against the dawn sky. Eleanor pulled her borrowed coat tighter, watching her breath form clouds in the frigid air. According to Lyra, the transition gate lay within a cave system near the summit of what locals called the Widow's Peak. We're being followed, Eleanor said, nodding toward the valley below where distant figures moved methodically across the landscape. Not just Barion's people anymore. Those look like military units. The governments have been notified, Lyra confirmed grimly. Your world's authorities now believe I represent an extraterrestrial incursion. Eleanor almost laughed despite their dire situation. Instead of just an interdimensional one? In their 12 days of travel, a strained camaraderie had developed between them, forged through shared danger and dependency. Eleanor had witnessed Lyra manipulate energy in ways that defied physical laws, while Lyra had experienced human resilience and adaptability through Eleanor. The cave entrance should be visible from the ridge above, Lyra said, pointing to an outcropping halfway up the mountainside. Once inside, we will find the archway of transition. They began their ascent as first light touched the peaks. Eleanor, despite years of working in demanding conditions, struggled to match Lyra's effortless climbing. The cold bit through her inadequate clothing, and her medical bag, now containing precious few supplies, thumped awkwardly against her side. Tell me about your world, Eleanor requested during a brief rest, partly from curiosity and partly to distract herself from her aching muscles. Lyra gazed toward the horizon. Avarice exists alongside your Earth, occupying the same physical space in a different phase reality. Our cities are built within mountains and forests rather than replacing them. Our technology developed through understanding energy manipulation rather than material exploitation. No resource wars? Eleanor asked. We have conflicts, Lyra admitted. Power struggles, ideological differences. My ascension to the Northern Throne is contested by those who wish to fully reintegrate with human civilization. They believe sharing our knowledge would benefit both worlds. And you disagree? Lyra's expression darkened. History has shown that when advanced technology reaches those unprepared for its implications, destruction follows. Your world still wages war over resources, ideology, and territory. Eleanor couldn't argue the point. Yet you saved me in that building. You could have neutralized those mercenaries permanently but didn't. Perhaps I'm reconsidering some assumptions, Lyra said quietly. By midday, they reached the cave entrance, a narrow fissure in the rock face that would be easily missed without precise directions. As they squeezed through, Eleanor activated her flashlight, revealing a cavern whose walls were covered with the same intricate symbols that marked Lyra's skin. The transition gate was established here during the first separation, over 12,000 years ago, Lyra explained, her markings resonating with the symbols on the walls, creating a subtle luminescence throughout the chamber. They moved deeper into the mountain, following passages that seemed partially natural and partially constructed. Eleanor noticed the air becoming warmer, carrying scents of vegetation that seemed impossible this deep underground. We're getting close to the phase boundary, Lyra said. The environment begins to blend here. A thunderous rumble shook the passageway, sending small stones clattering down from above. They've found us, Eleanor realized. Explosives at the entrance. Lyra quickened their pace. The archway is just ahead. Once we cross, they cannot follow without proper preparation. They emerged into a vast underground chamber where a freestanding arch of unknown material stood at the center. Unlike the stone surrounding it, the arch appeared to be made of a substance that shifted between solid and liquid states, its surface rippling like disturbed water. Lyra approached the arch, placing her palms against its surface. Her markings flared brilliantly, and the space within the arch shimmered, revealing glimpses of verdant landscape beyond. "It's activating," Lyra said, relief evident in her voice. "We can cross now." More explosions echoed through the caverns. Eleanor glanced back toward the passage they had traveled. "Come," Lyra urged, extending her hand toward Eleanor. "You'll be welcomed among my people." Eleanor hesitated. "If I cross with you, can I ever return?" "The pathways can be reopened," Lyra said. "But consider carefully. Your world will see you as a collaborator with an alien threat. And mine may view you with suspicion as a human." Before Eleanor could respond, armed figures appeared at the chamber entrance. Bar-Ion mercenaries mixed with military personnel, weapons raised. "Step away from the anomaly, Dr. Hayes," a commanding voice ordered. Eleanor looked from the soldiers to Lyra, then to the shimmering gateway between worlds. In that moment, she realized the choice before her was not simply between worlds, but between clinging to the familiar past or embracing an uncertain future filled with both danger and wonder. With a deep breath, she made her decision. The Royal Council chamber of Verisendal hummed with tense energy as Eleanor stood beside Lyra before the assembled Averay elders. 6 months had passed since their dramatic escape through the transition gate, during which time Eleanor had adapted to a world that defied her previous understanding of reality. Verisendal, the northern capital of the Averay realm, was a marvel of organic architecture, buildings grown rather than constructed, seamlessly integrated with the ancient forest canopy. Technology here functioned through principles Eleanor was still struggling to comprehend, despite Lyra's patient tutoring. "The human presence taints these proceedings," declared Council Elder Theron, his silver markings pulsing with agitation. "Particularly as we discuss matters of succession and security." Lyra, dressed in ceremonial attire that amplified her regal bearing, stepped forward. "Dr. Hayes stands as living proof that human consciousness has evolved. Her actions demonstrate capacity for sacrifice, adaptation, and understanding beyond self-interest." Eleanor remained silent, having learned that in Averay culture, defending oneself was considered a sign of insecurity rather than strength. Instead, she met the council's gazes steadily, noting the varying degrees of hostility, curiosity, and occasional compassion in their expressions. "The border incursions increase daily," said Elder Mira, the most moderate voice on the council. Bar-Ion Group's scientists have replicated rudimentary detection technology from salvaged artifacts. They cannot yet create functional transition gates, but they are dangerously close. Holographic displays materialized in the chamber's center, showing surveillance imagery of human military and scientific personnel establishing bases near known boundary thin points between the worlds. "This validates the position I have maintained for decades," Lyra stated. "Isolation has protected our civilization from human exploitation. However..." She paused, glancing at Eleanor. "Recent experiences have convinced me that complete isolation is no longer sustainable." Murmurs rippled through the council. "You advocate integration now?" Theron asked incredulously. "After leading the isolation faction for centuries?" "I advocate selective and controlled revelation," Lyra clarified. "The human world is fracturing under resource scarcity that our sustainable technologies could alleviate. Their weapons development continues to accelerate. If they breach our realm through their own crude methods rather than guided transition, the consequences would be catastrophic for both worlds." Eleanor stepped forward, addressing the council despite protocol. "Your Highness, honored elders, I've witnessed both the best and worst of humanity. We are capable of tremendous destruction, yes, but also remarkable compassion and innovation. The Bar-Ion Group represents human greed and power hunger, not our entire species." She gestured to the holographic displays. These efforts will continue regardless of your decision today. The choice isn't between contact or no contact, it's between controlled engagement or chaotic collision. A tense silence filled the chamber until Elder Mira spoke. The human speaks with wisdom that reflects well on Lyra's judgment. What precisely do you propose, heir to the Northern Throne? Lyra's expression was resolute. I propose establishing a transition council, Avaray and selected humans working together to introduce our worlds gradually. Dr. Hayes has identified trustworthy scientists, diplomats, and leaders who could participate. And when these humans desire our energy manipulation technology for weapons? Theron challenged. We share environmental and medical applications first, Lyra replied. Agricultural systems, pollution remediation, renewable energy. The human world stands at a precipice of climate collapse. Solving these crises builds trust before more sensitive knowledge is shared. Eleanor watched the council members exchange glances, sensing the historical weight of the moment. After centuries of separation, the future of two civilizations hung in balance. There is also the matter of the throne, Elder Mira noted. Your claim cannot be formalized while this crisis remains unresolved. Lyra nodded. I am prepared to take the sovereignty trials, but first we must address the immediate threat. The Bar-Ion group has already weaponized fragments of our technology. Without intervention, they will eventually succeed in creating unstable transition points. After hours of deliberation, the council reached its decision. A transition council would be established, with Eleanor serving as the first human ambassador. Lyra would lead a delegation to make controlled first contact with selected human representatives, not governments or corporations, but scientists and humanitarian leaders who might understand the profound implications of interdimensional cooperation. Later, in the privacy of Lyra's chambers, Eleanor gazed out at the bioluminescent forest that surrounded the capital. Do you think it will work? She asked softly. Lyra joined her at the window. There will be resistance from both sides. Fear, mistrust, attempts to weaponize or exploit. But there will also be wonder, collaboration, and growth. She touched Eleanor's hand, her markings glowing softly. Your presence here has changed me, challenged assumptions I held for centuries. And your world has shown me possibilities I never imagined, Eleanor replied. Technologies that could end hunger, heal environments, transform human suffering. Two worlds, Lyra mused, existing in parallel for thousands of years, each incomplete without the other's perspective. As they stood together at the threshold of a new era, Eleanor reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her here, from pulling a strange woman from rubble to standing as the bridge between civilizations. Whatever challenges awaited in the delicate process of bringing two worlds together, she knew with certainty that neither realm would ever be the same again. And perhaps, she thought as the lights of Verisendal shimmered like earthbound stars around them, that transformation was exactly what both worlds needed.